I'm Juniper Thorne, 34, and I currently hold the controlling interest in the most advanced quantum logistics network in the world. I sat alone in my corner office on the 42nd floor, the city lights of Seattle sprawling out beneath me like a circuit board I had personally wired. The air conditioning hummed with a silence that cost millions to engineer. On the mahogany desk in front of me sat a piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It was embossed with gold leaf. The script was elegant, swirling, and mocking. Oakhaven High School, class of 2009, 15-year reunion. My fingers hovered over it. I didn't want to touch it. Just looking at the school crest printed at the top made my throat tight. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a traitorous, frantic rhythm that belonged to a scared teenager, not a tech mogul. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I wasn't surrounded by Italian leather and glass. I was back in the gymnasium. The smell hit me first. Sulfur, burning plastic, the acrid tang of ozone. I was 19 years ago, standing over the smoking ruins of my senior capstone project. It was supposed to be a prototype for a kinetic energy transfer system. I had spent 6 months welding, coding, and soldering in my dad's garage. I hadn't slept in 3 days. I wanted to show them. I wanted to prove that I wasn't just the quiet girl who sat in the back of AP Physics wearing oversized hoodies. But the capacitor had blown. It didn't just fail, it exploded. A shower of sparks had rained down onto the polished gym floor, scorching the wood. The fire alarm blared, a deafening, rhythmic shriek that tore through my eardrums. Then came the silence as the alarm cut off. And then came the laughter. It started with Derek Vance. Of course it was Derek. He was the golden boy, the quarterback, the son of the town's richest manufacturer. He pointed a finger at me, his face red with mirth. "Nice fireworks, Junk Iper," he howled. The nickname caught instantly. Junk Iper, Junk Iper. The chant rippled through the crowd. My face burned so hot I thought my skin would melt off. I looked toward the teachers for help, for some kind of salvation. I saw Principal Miller marching toward me, his face purple with rage. "You are a liability, Miss Thorne," he screamed over the laughter of 300 students. "This is a place of learning, not a testing ground for your delusions. You're expelled. Get your trash and get out." I remembered the walk of shame to the double doors. I remembered the way Derek Vance high-fived his friends as I passed. I remembered the feeling of total, absolute worthlessness. I was the girl who blew up the gym, the failure, the freak. I opened my eyes, the flashback faded, replaced by the cool blue light of my monitors. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking. They were manicured, steady, and resting on a desk that cost more than Principal Miller's entire annual salary. I picked up the invitation. The paper felt thick and expensive. I flipped it over, sponsored by Vance Manufacturing. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It echoed in the empty office. Vance Manufacturing, Derek's family company, the pride of Oakhaven. They didn't know. They couldn't possibly know. I turned to my computer and typed in a command. A graph filled the screen, a jagged red line plummeting downward. Vance Manufacturing was bleeding out. Their supply chain was archaic. Their logistics were a mess. They were 3 weeks away from bankruptcy. They were drowning in debt and the sharks were circling. I was the shark. My company, Thorne Dynamics, had been quietly acquiring their debt for 6 months. I owned their loans. I owned their distribution routes. Technically, as of this morning's closing bell, I owned the controlling stake in the bank that held their mortgage. I looked back at the invitation. They expected the girl they expelled. They expected Junk Iper, the failure who disappeared after high school and never looked back. They probably thought I was working at a diner somewhere or maybe in jail for arson. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. My reflection stared back at me. Sharp jawline, tailored blazer. Eyes that had seen things Derek Vance couldn't even comprehend. I wasn't going to throw the invitation away. I reached for my phone and dialed my executive assistant. Sarah, I said, my voice steady and cold. Clear my schedule for the weekend. Prepare the jet. I'm going to Oak Haven. Of course, Miss Thorne, should I book a hotel? No, I said, buy the hotel, the one downtown, the Grand Oak Haven. I want the penthouse suite, and I want the staff briefed on my dietary requirements within the hour. You consider it done. I hung up. I picked up the invitation again, tapping the corner against my lips. I wasn't going back to reconnect. I wasn't going back to reminisce about the good old days. I was going back to inspect my new acquisition. I walked over to the closet in my office where I kept my emergency gala wear. I pushed past the safe blacks and navies. My hand landed on a dress I had never worn. It was crimson red, bold, unapologetic, the color of a warning sign. The color of fire. I pulled it out. The fabric felt like liquid courage in my hands. They laughed at my failure. They cheered when I was kicked out onto the street. They thought they had broken me, but all they did was strip away the fear. They took away the girl who cared what people thought and left behind a woman who only cared about results. I checked the time. The reunion started in 4 hours. The flight was 45 minutes. I would be late. Fashionably, devastatingly late. I walked out of my office, the heels of my shoes clicking against the marble floor like the ticking of a countdown clock. I didn't lock the door behind me. I didn't need to. I own the building. I was going to the reunion, and I wasn't just bringing a potato salad. I was bringing the receipt for their entire existence. I'm Juniper Thorne, 34, and I currently hold the controlling interest in the most advanced quantum logistics network in the world. I stepped out of the black town car and looked up at the towering facade of the Hilton, my stomach twisting into a familiar cold knot. I had decided against the red dress at the last second. Red was emotion. Red was anger. I wasn't here to be angry. I was here to be the executioner, and executioners wear black. I smoothed the lapels of my suit, a custom-tailored piece from a faceless boutique in Zurich that didn't put labels on their clothes because their clients didn't need them. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and the sound hit me like a physical blow. Top 40 hits from a decade ago thumped against the walls, vibrating in the floorboards beneath my heels. The air was thick, suffocatingly warm, and smelled of cheap catering wine, expensive perfume, and old grudges. I walked toward the grand ballroom, my pulse thumping a steady rhythm in my ears. Thump, thump, thump. It was the only sound I allowed myself to focus on. I barely made it 3 steps onto the plush carpet before the atmosphere shifted. The conversations near the entrance died out. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. I felt their gazes crawling over me, dissecting me, looking for the cracks in the armor. I kept my chin high, my face a mask of bored indifference. Then a shadow fell over me. Well, look what the cat dragged in from the dumpster. The voice was oily and deep, vibrating with a smugness that hadn't changed in 15 years. I stopped. I didn't flinch. I slowly turned my head to the left. Marcus Vane stood there, blocking my path to the bar. He was heavier now, his face puffy from years of scotch and entitlement, but the cruelty in his eyes was perfectly preserved. He was flanked by his inner circle, Jessica Miller and Todd Hands. The same 3 people who had held the camera phone while the principal screamed at me. The same 3 who had uploaded the video titled Explosive Failure before I had even left the school grounds. My breath hitched in my throat for a microsecond, a reflex from a scared teenager I thought I had buried. I killed the reaction instantly. I forced my breathing to slow. In, out, I looked Marcus dead in the eye. Marcus, I said. My voice was calm, flat, and devoid of warmth. We didn't think you'd show, Juniper, Marcus sneered, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. I heard you were working at a tech support call center in Boise. Or was it a Genius bar? Jessica giggled, a sharp, brittle sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, stop it, Mark, look at her. She gestured vaguely at my outfit with a manicured hand. She's clearly trying her best. That suit is very practical, very assistant manager. Todd snorted into his beer. Yeah, it's nice that they let you off your shift to come see how the other half lives. They scan me from head to toe, their eyes lingering on the lack of logos, the absence of flashy jewelry, the matte black fabric that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. They saw simplicity and assumed poverty. They saw silence and assumed weakness. My skin prickled with heat, but my hands remained steady at my sides. They had no idea. They didn't know that the fabric of my suit was woven with ballistic-grade fibers for personal security when I traveled to unstable regions. They didn't know that the shoes on my feet were prototyped 3D printed leather from a company I had acquired last Tuesday. And they certainly didn't notice the watch. I casually adjusted my left cuff, exposing the timepiece for just a second. It was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, custom assembled. It was understated, devoid of diamonds, and looked like a simple mechanical watch to the untrained eye. It cost $3 million. It cost more than Marcus's four-bedroom suburban McMansion. It cost more than the luxury SUV he leased to look important. It cost more than the entirety of the debt his failing company was currently drowning in. I looked at the watch face. It was 8:04 p.m. I'm not here to catch up, Marcus, I said, letting a small, cold smile touch my lips. And I'm not here for the open bar. Marcus laughed, looking back at his friends for validation. Then why are you here, Juniper? To beg for a job, because Vance Manufacturing isn't hiring screw-ups, we have standards. The irony was so sharp I almost tasted blood. Vance Manufacturing, I repeated, tasting the name. How is the supply chain holding up, Marcus? I heard you were having trouble with your logistics provider in the Pacific Rim. Marcus froze. The smile didn't leave his face, but it didn't reach his eyes anymore. The glass in his hand stopped swirling. How do you know about that? He snapped, his voice dropping an octave. I read, I said simply, news travels. That's internal company business, he hissed, stepping closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. Go back to the kids' table, Juniper. The adults are talking. He turned his back on me, dismissing me like I was nothing more than a nuisance. Jessica gave me a pitying look before turning away, and Todd shook his head, muttering pathetic under his breath. I stood there, watching the back of his cheap, rented tuxedo. My heart wasn't racing from fear anymore. It was racing from anticipation. The adrenaline flooded my system, sharpening my vision, making the colors of the room more vivid. I wasn't the victim in the center of the circle anymore. I was the predator watching the prey graze, completely unaware that the grass was already burning around them. I tapped the face of my $3 million watch. Tick, tock. I walked past them, my shoulder brushing against Marcus's arm just hard enough to make him spill a drop of his drink. I didn't apologize. I headed straight for the stage at the front of the room. It was time to introduce myself properly. I didn't step onto the stage, not yet. I walked right past the stairs leading up to the microphone, feeling the eyes of 200 people tracking my movement like a spotlight. Instead of grabbing the mic, I pulled out the empty chair at table 1. the center table directly in front of the podium reserved for the reunion committee. I sat down. Silence rippled through the immediate vicinity. Jessica Miller, who was sitting to my right, stiffened so abruptly her silver hoop earrings trembled. She looked at me, her mouth slightly agape, waiting for me to apologize or explain why the class pariah was sitting with the prom royalty. I didn't look at her. I simply picked up the linen napkin, unfolded it with a sharp snap that echoed in the quiet pocket of the room, and laid it across my lap. "Is this seat taken?" I asked, looking straight ahead at the empty stage. I didn't wait for an answer. The tension was thick enough to choke on, but then the servers arrived, breaking the spell with the clatter of plates and the smell of overcooked chicken and lukewarm asparagus. The noise of the room slowly returned, a low hum of gossip that I knew was entirely about me. I could feel their whispers against the back of my neck. "What is she doing here? Does she know she doesn't belong? Look at her suit, she looks like a funeral director." I didn't eat, I just watched. I watched Marcus Vane working the room. He was shaking hands, slapping backs, playing the part of the benevolent king returning to his subjects. He looked successful. He smelled successful. But I had seen his balance sheets. I knew that the suit he was wearing was leased, just like the company cars, just like the manufacturing equipment in his factories. 20 minutes into the main course, the clinking started. Ding, ding, ding. Marcus was standing at the podium, tapping a spoon against his champagne flute. The sound pierced through the chatter, bringing the room to a hush. He grinned, his face flushed with wine and the high of attention. "Welcome back, class of '09. He bellowed into the microphone. Applause broke out. It was enthusiastic, sycophantic. They loved him. They loved the idea of him. "It's been 15 years, Marcus continued, leaning casually against the podium. 15 years since we walked these halls. We've all gone on to do great things. Vance Manufacturing has had its best year yet, expanding into 3 new markets." He paused for applause. He got it. I didn't clap. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the tablecloth. "But," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, a smirk curling the corner of his mouth, "we can't forget where we came from. We can't forget the memories that made us who we are." His eyes scanned the room and locked directly onto me, the predator locking onto the prey. "I see some familiar faces tonight," he said, and the room seemed to tilt. "Even some we didn't expect. Juniper Thorne is with us." The spotlight didn't move, but it felt like it had swung directly into my eyes. Every head turned toward table 1. "You know," Marcus chuckled, gripping the sides of the podium, "seeing Juniper reminds me of our junior year. Who could forget the great discovery?" A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. They knew the story. It was the folklore of our class. "For those who don't remember," Marcus said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy, "Juniper here was convinced she had invented a revolutionary energy source. Some kind of quantum battery she cooked up in her garage." He laughed, a deep, booming sound that invited everyone else to join in. "She brought it to the chemistry lab to show Mr. Henderson," Marcus continued, gesturing wildly. "She called it the future. We called it the bomb." I'll never forget the look on her face when that imaginary tech of hers blew the windows out of the second floor. The room erupted. It wasn't just a chuckle, it was a roar. It was the release of 15 years of judgment. They were laughing at the girl with the soot on her face. They were laughing at the scholarship kid who tried to fly too close to the sun. "The funniest failure in school history," Marcus shouted over the laughter, wiping a tear from his eye. "It cost the school 50 grand in repairs and got her expelled. And for what? A battery that didn't exist." He pointed a finger at me. But hey, Juniper, he grinned. At least you made a bang, right? I hope you're not building any more bombs in your basement. The laughter was deafening now. Jessica, sitting next to me, covered her mouth with her hand to hide her giggles, her eyes dancing with malicious delight. I sat there, and for a split second, I wasn't the CEO of Thorn Logistics. I was 17 again. I felt the heat rising in my neck, a physiological betrayal I couldn't control. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My stomach twisted into a hard, cold knot. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, trying to crush me into the floorboards. They thought I was a joke. They thought my life's work was a punchline. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to tell them that the imaginary tech Marcus was mocking was currently powering the server farms that hosted their social media profiles. But I didn't. I forced my lungs to expand. In, I held the breath for 3 seconds. Out, I reached for my glass of sparkling water. My hand did not shake. The condensation was cold against my fingertips, grounding me. I lifted the glass to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The bubbles bit at my tongue. I lowered the glass and looked up at Marcus. He was beaming, basking in the adulation, thinking he had just won. He thought he had put me in my place. He thought he was the alpha. He didn't check his phone. If he had, he would have seen the notification. I glanced at the Patek Philippe on my wrist. The second hand swept past the 12. It was 8:30 p.m. The markets in Tokyo had just opened. The press release had been scheduled for exactly this moment. My legal team had filed the paperwork with the SEC precisely 60 seconds ago. I wasn't just here for a reunion. I was here for a hostile takeover. I set my glass down on the table with a soft clink that only I could hear. The laughter was starting to die down, fading into the comfortable murmur of people who felt superior. Marcus wiped his mouth and reached for his wine, looking satisfied. Anyway, he said, let's toast to success, to real success. I smiled. It was a small, sharp thing. Actually, Marcus, I said, I didn't shout, I didn't have to. I projected my voice the way I did in boardrooms from London to Singapore. It cut through the lingering laughter like a razor through silk. I think I'd like to say a few words. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound was harsh, violent. Marcus looked down at me, his eyebrows raised in mock amusement. Oh, you want to defend your honor, Juniper? Go ahead. The mic is yours. Try not to blow it up. Jessica snorted into her napkin. I walked toward the stairs. My heels sank slightly into the plush carpet, but my stride was steady. I ascended the 3 steps to the stage. I walked up to the podium. Marcus didn't move. He stood there, looming over me, smelling of arrogance and cheap Chardonnay. He expected me to stammer. He expected me to cry. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand. I turned to face the room. 200 faces stared back. Some were smirking, some were pitying. All of them were about to have the worst night of their lives. Marcus is right, I said into the mic. My voice boomed through the speakers, clear and distorted by zero feedback. I did blow up the chemistry lab. I paused. The room went silent. I was trying to stabilize a quantum lattice for high-density energy storage. I continued, my tone conversational. I was 17. I missed a decimal point in the thermal regulation algorithm. It was a rookie mistake. I turned my head slowly to look at Marcus. He was frowning now, confused by my tone. But I fixed the algorithm, Marcus, I said softly. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer. The crowd flinched as if expecting a weapon. In a way, it was. I pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen once and held it up. And 3 minutes ago, I said, turning back to the crowd, Thorn Logistics, the company built on that imaginary tech, just acquired a 51% controlling stake in Vance Manufacturing. I looked at Marcus. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. "You're not the CEO anymore, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like thunder. "I am. I'm Juniper Thorn, 33 years old, and I just executed the most ruthless corporate hostile takeover in Wall Street history while wearing a dress that cost more than my high school principal's annual salary." The silence that followed my announcement was absolute. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was the vacuum of 1,000 gasps being held simultaneously. I stood there at the podium, my phone still held aloft like a judge's gavel. I watched the blood drain from Marcus Vane's face. It didn't happen all at once. It started at his lips, which turned a pale, chalky gray and then spread upward to his cheeks. His eyes, usually so full of unearned confidence, darted frantically from my face to the screen of my phone and then out to the crowd. "She's lying," Marcus croaked. His voice cracked. It was a pathetic sound. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time, desperate to patch the hole I'd just blown in his ego. "She's lying," he shouted, gripping the sides of the podium until his knuckles turned white. This is a prank, a joke, just like her little science fair project." He turned to the crowd, forcing a smile that looked more like a rictus of pain. "Vane Global is a fortress," he declared, his voice rising in pitch. "Our stock is ironclad, our shareholders are loyal. You can't just buy a controlling stake in a family legacy like mine with a few taps on a screen. We are the backbone of the Atlantic supply chain. We are unbreakable." I lowered my phone slowly, sliding it back into my blazer pocket. I didn't argue, I didn't have to, I just watched him unravel. "We have the most secure logistics network in the hemisphere," Marcus babbled on, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "Our firewalls are military grade. Our shipping lanes are optimized by the best minds in the industry. Juniper here. She moves boxes. We move the world." He was manic now, pacing the small stage, trying to physically occupy the space I had taken from him. "You think some glitchy app developer can touch us?" he scoffed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Vane Global is a titan, we are the storm." That was when I felt it. It started as a single, sharp vibration against my hip, then a pause, then 3 rapid pulses. Zip, 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 my stomach dropped. That wasn't a text message. It wasn't an email. It wasn't even a standard system alert. I had programmed the haptic feedback on my device myself. I knew the language of my own code. That pattern meant only one thing: catastrophic system failure. I kept my face perfectly neutral, a mask of bored indifference, but under the table my hand clenched into a fist. I slipped my phone back out, shielding the screen from the crowd with my body. I unlocked it. The screen was flashing red. A scrolling command line was moving so fast it was a blur of white text on a crimson background. "Alert, 0-day exploit detected. Target, Global Maritime Logistics Grid. Vector, Port Authority Legacy Servers. Status, critical." My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a glitch. This was a God mode hack. Someone had found a backdoor in the international shipping protocols, the very protocols that Vane Global relied on. I scanned the data stream, my eyes processing the code faster than I could think. It was a cascading failure. The virus was jumping from port to port, locking down automated cranes, scrambling GPS coordinates, and shutting down cooling systems on container ships. And then I saw the signature of the malware. It was using an antiquated buffer overflow vulnerability. It was attacking the specific type of server architecture that I had phased out of Thorn Logistics 5 years ago. I looked up at Marcus. He was still bragging. My family built this empire on reliability, he was saying, puffing out his chest. We are online 24/7, we never sleep. Marcus, I said, my voice was low, barely audible over the microphone he was hogging. Don't interrupt me, he snapped, turning on me with a sneer. I'm telling them the truth. Vane Global is running perfectly. We are untouchable. I looked at the readout on my phone again. The infection rate was hitting 90% on his network. Marcus, I said again, louder this time, check your phone. I don't need to check my phone, he yelled, playing to the crowd. I know my company. I took a step closer to him. I could smell the fear radiating off him now, sour and metallic. Your automated fleet just went dark in the Strait of Malacca, I said calmly. Marcus froze. What? Your Atlantic Division, I continued, reading the live casualty report from my screen. The navigational arrays just reset to factory defaults. Your ships are drifting blind, and the cooling units on your pharmaceutical transports, they just shut down. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. You're crazy, you're making this up. And in about 10 seconds, I said, looking him dead in the eye, the ransomware is going to hit your personal devices. Liar, he screamed. Screech. The sound tore through the room. It wasn't feedback from the microphone. It was coming from Marcus's pocket. It was an emergency alert, a high-pitched, oscillating siren that sounded like a dying animal. Marcus jumped as if he'd been electrocuted. He scrambled to get his phone out of his pocket, nearly dropping it on the stage. He stared at the screen. The color that had drained from his face earlier didn't return. Instead, he turned a sickly shade of green. Then a second sound joined the first. BZZZZT, BZZZZT, BZZZZT. It was the phone of his vice president, who was sitting at table 1. Then another phone, then another. A chorus of digital panic began to rise from the tables closest to the stage, the tables where Marcus's executive team and board members were sitting. It was a symphony of disaster. What is this? Marcus whispered, tapping frantically at his screen. I can't get in. It's locked. It says, God, it says all files are encrypted. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. The arrogance was gone. The bully was gone. All that was left was a man watching his life burn down. The grid is down, Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the alarms. The exploit is targeting the legacy code your father installed in the 90s, the code you were too cheap to update. I took a step back, giving him room to panic. My ships are fine, I said, loud enough for the front row to hear. Thorn Logistics runs on a proprietary quantum-resistant kernel. I wrote the patch for this exploit 6 months ago. Marcus looked at his phone, then at his weeping VP, and finally at me. He looked small. He looked like he was about to vomit on his leased shoes. Juniper, he stammered, his voice trembling. The pharmaceutical shipment, it's insulin. Millions of dollars of insulin if the cooling is down. It spoils in 2 hours, I finished for him. Bankrupting your company and triggering a massive lawsuit that will put you in prison for negligence. The room was in chaos now. People were checking their portfolios, making calls, shouting over the noise of the alarms. I stood perfectly still in the center of the storm. I can't stop it, Marcus whispered, the realization crushing him. I don't have the key. I know you don't, I said coldly. I held up my phone again. The screen glowed with the blue interface of my command terminal. The deploy patch button was pulsing, waiting for my thumbprint. But I do. I'm Juniper Thorn, 33 years old, And I'm currently the only person in a room full of billionaires who isn't watching their net worth evaporate in real time. The sound of catastrophic failure is louder than you think. It isn't just the digital screech of emergency alerts causing feedback loops in the microphone system. It's the sound of 300 crystal champagne flutes rattling against table surfaces as people tremble. It's the guttural, animalistic shouting of men who are used to controlling the world, realizing they can't even control their own thermostats. I stood completely still, my thumb hovering over the execute command on my phone screen. Marcus Vane was no longer looking at me. He was screaming into his mobile, his face a mottled map of red rage and white terror. "Pull the plug," he shrieked, spit flying onto the lapel of his $5,000 tuxedo. "I don't care about the protocols." "Hard reset the server farm, do it now." He listened for a split second, then hurled his phone at the floor. It skidded across the parquet, cracking the screen, but the alerts didn't stop. They were coming from everywhere now. I watched him hyperventilate. His chest was heaving. He looked like a man drowning on dry land. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. It was room temperature, but it felt like ice in my veins. I was calm. I was terrifyingly calm. "It won't work, Marcus," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden lull of his breathlessness, it carried. He whipped his head around, his eyes wild. "You," he hissed. "You did this, you locked us out." "I didn't do anything," I replied, stepping off the small stage and walking toward his table. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, their eyes wide, phone screens illuminating their terrified faces with a ghostly blue light. "I simply stopped using the architecture you're currently drowning in." I warned the industry 5 years ago that the Vane proprietary stack was a house of cards. You called me hysterical. I stopped directly in front of him. I was close enough to smell the sour tang of adrenaline spiking through his pores. "And now," I gestured to the room, "the wind is blowing." A heavy-set man from the board of directors, a guy named Henderson who had once told me my business model was cute, stumbled forward. He was clutching his tablet like a shield. "Juniper," Henderson stammered, sweat dripping from his nose. "Miss Thorne, please, the Grim Reaper protocol just initiated on the logistics dashboard. We're losing $40 million every 10 minutes. The stock, the algorithm is auto-selling. We're in free fall." I looked at Henderson. I didn't blink. "Correction, Henderson, you've lost $40 million in the last 8 minutes. The rate is accelerating because the virus has hit your Asian distribution hubs. The latency is gone. It's real time now." I tapped my screen and held it up for him to see. A digital map of the world was displayed. While Vane Global's nodes were blinking angry crimson red, creating a web of paralysis across the Atlantic, my nodes, Thorne Logistics, were pulsing a steady, serene green. "My ships are moving," I said softly. "My trucks are rolling. My cold storage is holding at exactly 36 degrees Fahrenheit." Marcus lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table to support himself. "The insulin," he choked out. "Juniper, forget the stock, the FDA transport. If those cooling units fail, people die. That's criminal negligence. That's life in prison." "I know," I said. I looked him up and down. This was the boy who had tripped me in the cafeteria. This was the man who had bought my first startup for scraps and dismantled it just to get the patents. This was the king of logistics. "I can save it," I said. The room went silent. The alarms were still blaring, but the human noise died instantly. Every eye fixed on me. "How?" Marcus whispered. "It says it's impossible. The encryption key is rotating every 3 seconds." "My system uses a quantum interfaced override," I explained, using words I knew he barely understood. I can bridge your legacy servers through my satellite uplink. I can patch the vulnerability and force a reboot of your cooling systems. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. I can have your grid back online in 30 seconds. Marcus looked at me with naked hope. It was pathetic. Do it, he begged. Please just do it. I didn't move. I didn't tap the screen. No, I said. The color drained from his face again. What you just said, I said I can, I corrected him. I didn't say I would, not for free. And certainly not for the man who tried to publicly humiliate me 10 minutes ago. The air in the ballroom grew heavy. The tension was physical, pressing against my eardrums. What do you want? Henderson barked, panic making him brave. Money will pay you. Name the consulting fee. 10 million, 20? I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that startled me. I don't want your money, Henderson. I just bought 51% of your company. Technically, it's my money you're offering me. I turned back to Marcus. He was shaking. I want the seat, I said. Marcus blinked, confused. The board seat? The chair, I said, and the resignation of the CEO effective immediately. Signed, time-stamped, and uploaded to the SEC portal before I lift a finger. You can't be serious, Marcus gasped. This is blackmail. This is business, I shot back, my voice hardening. You are piloting a crashing plane, Marcus. I'm the only one with a parachute. You can either hand me the controls or you can ride it into the ground and take everyone in this room with you. I glanced at my watch. The insulin spoils in 90 minutes, but the market closes in 15. If you don't stabilize the grid before the closing bell, the trading algorithms will delist Vane Global. You will be penniless before dinner. I held my phone out. The deploy patch button pulsed rhythmically, a heartbeat of salvation. Tick-tock, Marcus. He looked at the board members. They weren't looking at him, they were looking at me. They had already made their choice. They wanted to save their fortunes. Marcus was expendable. He looked back at me, tears of frustration welling in his eyes. He knew it was over. He knew I had won not just the game, but the entire league. Okay, he whispered, his voice breaking. Okay, I'll do it, just stop the bleeding. Loudly, I commanded, so everyone can hear. Marcus closed his eyes. He took a shuddering breath. I resign, he yelled, his voice cracking violently. I resign as CEO of Vane Global. I give full executive control to Juniper Thorne. Just fix it. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just closed its jaws. Smart choice, I said. I pressed my thumb against the screen. Authentication confirmed. Deploying quantum bridge. Patch uploaded. The room held its breath. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the screeching from Marcus's phone cut out. One by one, the alarms in the room silenced. The frantic red scrolling text on the giant projector screen froze, stuttered, and then washed over in a calm, cool blue. System reboot initiated. Cooling systems online, navigation restored. A collective sigh swept through the room, a physical release of tension that nearly knocked me over. I didn't look at the screen. I kept my eyes on Marcus. You're welcome, I said. I turned around and walked back toward the podium, my heels clicking sharply on the floor. I grabbed the microphone one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice echoing through the now silent ballroom. Dinner is served, and tomorrow morning bring your resumes. I'll be cleaning house. I'm Juniper Thorne, 33 years old, and I just executed the most violent hostile takeover in corporate history without shedding a single drop of blood. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm that completely contradicted the ice-cold mask I wore on my face. The ballroom was still frozen in a tableau of shock. Waiters stood paralyzed with silver trays of melting sorbet. Board members were slumped in their chairs like marionettes whose strings had been cut. I could feel the adrenaline vibrating in my fingertips, a buzzing electric current that made the fine crystal of my water glass tremble slightly as I set it down on the table. I wasn't just walking away. I was collecting my trophies. I moved back to the table where my phone, my weapon, still lay connected to the room's main display port. The screen was awash in the calming, rhythmic cascade of green code, the Thorn protocol executing its complex handshake with the satellite grid. It was beautiful. It was poetry written in syntax that these men had spent millions trying to replicate and failed. That was when I felt the shadow fall over me. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn around immediately. I knew exactly who it was by the smell of stale coffee and nervous sweat that cut through the room's expensive cologne. "It's not possible," a voice whispered. I turned slowly. Standing there looking like he had just seen a ghost was David Chen. I knew David. Not personally, but I knew his mind. He was Vane Global's chief technology officer, a man whose articles on latency reduction I had read in Wired and TechCrunch. He was brilliant, underappreciated, and currently staring at my phone screen with his mouth hanging open. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the header of the command prompt running on my display. Executing THORNE protocol v42 source JTHORNE/cryptographic signature. VERIFIED. David's eyes darted from the screen to my face, then back to the screen. His pupils were dilated. He looked like a man witnessing a miracle and a natural disaster simultaneously. "The architecture," he stammered, his fingers twitching as if he wanted to touch the screen but was afraid it would burn him. "The recursive loops, the quantum bridging. I've seen this syntax before." He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in a man's eyes. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of being utterly outclassed. "You're the architect," he breathed. I smirked, picking up my phone and severing the connection to the big screen. The projector behind us went dark, but the truth was already out. "Hello, David," I said, my voice smooth. "I enjoyed your paper on distributed ledger logistics. It was quaint. A little derivative, but solid." David didn't respond to the insult. He spun around, frantically scanning the room until he locked eyes with Marcus. Marcus was sitting on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands, a broken king in a ruined castle. David lunged at him, grabbing Marcus by the shoulder of his ruined tuxedo jacket and shaking him violently. "Marcus, look," David hissed, his voice rising in hysteria. "You idiot, look at her, look at the code." Marcus batted his hand away, his eyes hollow. "Leave me alone, David, it's over. She took it. She took everything." "No, you don't understand," David practically screamed, dragging Marcus to his feet and pointing a trembling finger at me. "We've been hunting the source code for the Phantom Logistics patch for 6 months. We spent $12 million on headhunters trying to find the anonymous developer who wrote the recursive compression algorithm." I watched Marcus's face. Confusion warred with misery. "What are you talking about?" "It's her," David yelled, the realization tearing out of his throat. "We've been trying to hire her, the ghost we've been chasing, the one you said we had to acquire at any cost because their tech was 5 years ahead of ours. It's Juniper." The silence that followed was heavier than lead. Marcus looked at me, really looked at me. He looked at the woman he had mocked in the hallway, the woman he had called a failure. The woman he had tripped in the cafeteria 15 years ago. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the gut. I saw the color drain from his face, leaving him a sickly, waxen gray. "You," Marcus whispered, You're the ghost. I prefer founder, I corrected him, slipping my phone into my clutch. But I suppose boss will do for now. I took a step closer to them. The power dynamic had shifted so drastically that the air around us felt pressurized. You spent 6 months trying to headhunt me, Marcus, I said softly, savoring every syllable. You sent emails to my encrypted servers offering me 7 figures, stock options, a corner office. You worshipped my code while spitting on my name. I let out a short, sharp laugh. And the irony, if you had just been nice to me at the reunion, if you had just treated me like a human being instead of a prop for your ego, I might have considered a merger. I might have let you keep your title. Marcus swayed on his feet. He looked like he was going to vomit. The magnitude of his mistake was crushing him. He hadn't just lost his company, he had lost it to the one person he had spent his life underestimating, the very person he had been desperate to recruit. David Chen looked at me with a mix of awe and terror. The patch, he asked, his voice trembling. The cooling systems. How did you bypass the encryption so fast? The latency is 0. That shouldn't be physically possible. I paused, looking at the door. I had a victory lap to run. Physics is just a suggestion when you write the rules, David, I said. Maybe if you keep your job, I'll teach you. I turned my back on them. I didn't need to see Marcus cry. I had already seen him break. Juniper, Marcus called out, his voice cracking, desperate, pathetic. Wait, we can talk, we can. I kept walking. The sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor was the only gavel I needed. Don't be late tomorrow, Marcus, I threw over my shoulder, not breaking stride. I hate tardiness, and bring coffee black. I pushed through the double doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the cool night air. The valet was already pulling my beat-up sedan around the corner. It wasn't a limousine. It wasn't a sports car. But as I slid into the driver's seat and tossed my phone onto the passenger side, I knew one thing for certain. It was the chariot of a queen. I'm Juniper Thorne, 33 years old, and right now I am the only person in this room who isn't watching their net worth evaporate in real time. The ballroom was dissolving into chaos. It started as a ripple, a few confused murmurs, the glow of smartphone screens lighting up faces in the dim mood lighting. And then it swelled into a tidal wave of panic. Vane Global's proprietary logistics network had just flatlined. I could hear the distinct, jarring ping of stock alert notifications going off on 100 different devices simultaneously, a discordant symphony of financial ruin. I sat perfectly still at table 9, my back straight, sipping my sparkling water. The condensation on the glass felt cool against my fingertips, grounding me, while the air around me grew hot with the collective body heat of 200 panicked executives. Then I saw him. Marcus Vane tore his eyes away from the giant projector screen, which was currently displaying a fatal system lockdown error in a violently pulsating red font. He scanned the room, his eyes wild until they landed on me. He didn't run. He didn't yell. He adjusted his tuxedo jacket, smoothed his hair, and began to walk toward my table. It was a performance. He was trying to salvage the illusion of control, forcing a swagger into his step that his trembling knees were fighting to reject. I didn't turn my body to face him. I unlocked my phone, opened a dummy terminal app, and started typing a grocery list. Juniper, Marcus said as he reached my table. His voice was tight, pitched an octave higher than his usual baritone. He leaned one hand on the tablecloth, his knuckles white. Hey, enjoying the dinner? I didn't look up. The chicken was dry, Marcus, but the entertainment is top tier. He let out a strained, breathless laugh that sounded more like a choke. Yeah, funny. Look, we're having a minor technical hiccup. The server grid is just cycling, standard maintenance glitch. I continued typing: almond milk, spinach, Greek yogurt. Right, I said, my eyes glued to my screen. Standard glitches usually don't cause a 40% drop in share price in 3 minutes. I just checked the ticker. You've lost $4 billion since the appetizers were cleared. I heard him swallow. It was a wet, audible click in his throat. The smell of him hit me then, sharp, acrid sweat cutting through his expensive sandalwood cologne. He was terrified. Juniper, he lowered his voice, leaning in closer. I know you dabble in code. I remember you were capable back in college. I almost laughed. Capable. He had called me a charity case with a keyboard in front of the entire student body senior year. I have a request, he continued, the desperation beginning to bleed through his mask. As a favor, between old friends. You could just take a look, maybe plug into the admin port. I know you consult for some firms. It's probably just a firewall issue. If you get it back online, I'll owe you a drink. A drink. He was offering me a gin and tonic to save his empire. I stopped typing. I didn't look up. I just let the silence hang there. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The silence stretched so tight I thought it might snap his spine. The people at the nearby tables had stopped panicking and started watching. They sensed the shift in gravity. The king was bowing to the peasant. Juniper, he whispered. I took another sip of my water. I set the glass down with a deliberate, soft clink. I'm not interested in a drink, Marcus, I said to my phone screen. And I'm not interested in your firewall. Please, he hissed, abandoning the facade entirely. My CTO is locked out. The backups are corrupted. The board is blowing up my phone. I don't know what's happening. I do, I said calmly. That made him freeze. What? Finally, slowly, I lifted my head. I looked him dead in the eye. My heart was pounding a war drum against my ribs, but my face was stone. It's not a glitch, Marcus, it's a foreclosure. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Sweat was beading on his upper lip, catching the red light from the disaster screen behind him. He looked around the room, realizing that everyone, his former classmates, his investors, his wife, was watching him beg the woman he had spent the evening mocking. You, he stammered, you did this. I didn't do anything, I said, leaning back in my chair. I just stopped maintaining the patch I wrote for your system 5 years ago under a pseudonym, the one your team stole, repurposed, and claimed as their own innovation. His face went gray. The ghost patch, that was you. It was me, I said. And now that I've stopped holding your hand, your entire infrastructure is collapsing under its own weight. He gripped the edge of the table so hard the silverware rattled. Fix it, Juniper, you have to fix it. We'll lose everything. I don't have to do anything, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You told everyone tonight that I was a failure. You said I wasn't vain material. So why would you want my help? He was shaking now, visibly vibrating. His knees gave out and he sank onto the empty chair beside me, burying his face in his hands. Name your price, he sobbed into his palms. Anything, consulting fee, stock, just make it stop. I looked at the ruined man beside me, then at the red screen, then at the crowd of stunned onlookers. I don't want money, Marcus, I said, my voice clear and cold. I want the microphone. I'm Juniper Thorne, 33 years old, and I just executed a hostile takeover of a Fortune 500 company without spending a single dime of my own money. The silence in the ballroom was heavy enough to crush a lung. 200 of the country's wealthiest tech moguls, venture capitalists, and socialites were holding their collective breath, their eyes darting between the pulsating red, system failure screens and the man weeping into his palms at my table. Marcus Vane, the golden boy, the king of Silicon Valley, looked up at me. His eyes were rimmed with red, his face slick with a cold, oily sweat that smelled of fear and expensive scotch. Name your price, he repeated, his voice cracking like dry wood. Juniper, please, I'll give you whatever you want. A consulting fee, 10 million, 20, just stop the bleeding. I didn't answer him immediately. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. The bubbles burst against my tongue, sharp and cold. I watched the stock ticker on the wall behind him plummet another 3 points. That was another $100 million vanishing into the ether. You think this is about money, Marcus? I asked softly. My voice was calm, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was the moment I had replayed in my head every night for 15 years. I have money, I continued, setting the glass down. My proprietary algorithms run the logistics for 3 of the G7 nations. I don't need your money, I need you to understand what is happening right now. David Chen, Vane Global's chief technology officer, sprinted over to our table. He was panting, his tie askew, holding a tablet that was flashing critical alerts. Marcus, David gasped, ignoring me. It's the ghost architecture. The cooling systems are rejecting the override. The latency is 0. It's like the code is. It's like it's alive. Someone is manually locking us out from the root. Marcus pointed a shaking finger at me. It's her. David froze. He turned to look at me, his eyes widening behind his thick-rimmed glasses. He looked from me to the tablet, then back to me. The realization hit him like a physical slap. You, David whispered. You're the ghost. I prefer architect. I corrected him, smoothing the napkin on my lap. But I suppose boss will do for now. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the marble floor echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I smoothed my dress, a simple black number that cost less than the appetizers Marcus had served tonight. You spent 6 months trying to headhunt me, Marcus, I said, my voice projecting clearly so the surrounding tables could hear. You sent encrypted emails to my servers offering me 7 figures, stock options, a corner office. You worshipped my code while spitting on my name. Marcus stood up slowly, his legs trembling. He looked small. I didn't know, he pleaded. Juniper, I didn't know it was you. If I had known. If you had known what? I cut him off, stepping into his personal space. You would have been nicer, you would have treated me like a human being instead of a prop for your ego. Think about the employees, Marcus begged, shifting tactics. Think about the innocent people who work for me, their pensions, their families. If the company collapses tonight, thousands of people lose their livelihoods. Don't punish them because you hate me. That was the trigger. The heat flared in my chest, molten and instantaneous. My vision narrowed until all I could see was his desperate, lying face. Don't you dare talk to me about collateral damage, I hissed. The memory washed over me, violent and visceral. I was 18 again. I could smell the floor wax of the high school cafeteria. I could feel the cold, wet sensation of the chocolate milk soaking into my shirt after Marcus had tripped me. I could hear the sound of 500 students laughing. Do you remember the chant, Marcus? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He blinked, confused. What, senior year, I said. The day I packed my locker, you started it. You stood on the table and started the chant. Freak, freak, freak. You got the whole football team to join in. You got the cheerleaders. You got the teachers to look the other way. I took another step forward. He took a step back. I lost my scholarship because of the rumors you started, I said, the words tasting like ash. I had to work 3 jobs to put myself through community college while you partied on your father's yacht. I built my empire from a basement with a laptop I bought at a pawn shop. So do not talk to me about innocent families. You didn't care about my family when we couldn't pay rent. The room was deathly silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. I'm not going to destroy the company, Marcus, I said, pulling my phone from my clutch. Because unlike you, I respect the work. The code is good. The infrastructure is sound. It just has a parasitic leadership problem. I tapped the screen 3 times. On the giant projector behind him, the red system failure screen blinked once, then turned a soothing, solid blue. The words "System restored, admin access granted" appeared in crisp white letters. A collective gasp swept through the room. The stock ticker froze, then ticked up green. Marcus slumped, relief washing over him so intensely he almost fell over. "Thank God," he breathed. "Thank you, Juniper, thank you. We can work this out. I'll make you a partner." "We can? Check your phone, Marcus," I interrupted. He frowned, pulling his device from his pocket. He looked at the screen, and the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, waxen gray. "What is this?" he whispered. "I didn't restore your access," I said, checking my reflection in a spoon on the table. "I transferred the root keys. As of 10 seconds ago, the Ghost Protocol has executed a mandatory equity swap. The board just received the notification. I am now the majority shareholder of Vane Global." David Chen looked at his tablet and choked. "She's right. The encryption keys. They're all hers. She owns the platform." Marcus looked up at me, his eyes hollow. "You stole my company." "I saved it," I said, turning my back on him. "Physics is just a suggestion when you write the rules, Marcus." I started walking toward the double doors. The path cleared instantly. People who had laughed at my beat-up car earlier were now staring at me with a mixture of terror and reverence. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. "Juniper." Marcus called out, his voice cracking, desperate, pathetic. "Wait, you can't just leave. What am I supposed to do?" I stopped. I didn't turn around. I let the sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor hang in the air for a second, the only gavel I needed. "Don't be late tomorrow, Marcus," I threw over my shoulder, not breaking stride. "I hate tardiness, and bring coffee." I pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the cool night air. The valet was already pulling my beat-up sedan around the corner. It wasn't a limousine. It wasn't a sports car. The paint was chipping on the hood and the muffler rattled. But as I slid into the driver's seat and tossed my phone onto the passenger side, I gripped the steering wheel and took a deep breath. My hands were finally steady. It was the chariot of a queen. I'm Juniper Thorne, 33 years old, and I am currently holding the digital knife to the throat of the man who ruined my teenage life. "Name your price," Marcus sobbed, his forehead resting against the cool white tablecloth. "Anything, just make it stop." The ballroom was vibrating. It wasn't just the hum of the servers crashing remotely. It was the palpable, suffocating tension of 200 wealthy spectators watching their investments burn in real time. The red light from the critical failure warning screens bathed the room in the color of an emergency room. It cast long, bloody shadows across Marcus's shaking shoulders. I didn't answer him immediately. I wanted to savor the vibration of the floorboards. I wanted to etch the image of his collapse into my memory so I could pull it out on rainy days. "Sit up, Marcus," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the deathly silence of the gym, it carried like a whip crack. He lifted his head. His face was a ruin. The arrogant smirk that had defined his high school years and his subsequent rise to tech stardom was gone. In its place was the raw, naked terror of a man watching his legacy evaporate. Snot and tears smeared his expensive lapel. "Fix it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, Juniper, I'll write you a check right now. 10 million, 50, name it." I reached into my clutch. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of my tablet. I had prepared this document 3 weeks ago, sitting in my small apartment, eating takeout noodles while I watched him give a smug interview on CNBC. I had waited for this exact moment. I pulled the device out and slammed it onto the table. The sound was sharp, heavy, and final. "I don't want your money," I said, sliding the screen toward him. "Your money is temporary. I want the source." Marcus looked down at the screen. His eyes struggled to focus through the tears, but as the bold, black letters registered, his breath hitched in his throat. Vane Global Transfer of Equity and Control Recipient, THORNE Holdings LLC stake, 51% majority, you. He choked, looking up at me with wide, horrified eyes. "You can't be serious. This is my company. My father started this." "And you crashed it," I said, leaning forward. "You built a precarious house of cards on stolen code and cut corners, and now the wind is blowing, Marcus. The Ghost protocol I initiated isn't just a glitch. It's a systemic purge. It's deleting the kernel. In about," I checked the sleek black watch on my wrist, "90 seconds the core data centers will initiate a hard wipe. Customer data, proprietary algorithms, backups, all of it, gone." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers behind us. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. They didn't understand the code, but they understood the threat. "You're bluffing," Marcus stammered, though his hand was already hovering over the tablet. "Am I?" I tapped the screen, bringing up a countdown timer. 00:59, 00:58. The patch to stop the wipe is encrypted in that contract. You sign, the system reboots, and the company survives. You don't sign, and tomorrow morning Vane Global is worth $0.00. He stared at the countdown. The red numbers were reflected in the sweat on his forehead. "This is extortion," David Chen, his CTO, hissed from the side, looking pale and sick. "It's a hostile takeover," I corrected him, not looking away from Marcus. "Welcome to the big leagues, David." 0040. Marcus looked around the room, desperate for a savior. He looked at his board members, but they were furiously typing on their phones, likely telling their brokers to dump the stock before the market opened. He looked at his wife, but she was staring at the floor, unable to witness his humiliation. He was alone, just like I had been when he tripped me in the cafeteria, just like I had been when he spread the rumors that stripped me of my scholarship. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus whispered, his hand shaking so violently he could barely hold himself up. "Is this because of high school? Really, it was 15 years ago, Juniper." "It was my life, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial temperature. "You took my future because you were bored. Now I'm taking yours because I'm better than you." 0020. The red light on the massive projector screens began to pulse faster. An audible alarm started to chirp from the speaker system, a high-pitched, rhythmic warning that signaled imminent data death. "Sign it, Marcus." Someone yelled from the crowd. It sounded like one of his investors. "Sign the damn thing, don't let it burn." Another voice screamed. The pressure broke him. I saw it happen physically. His shoulders collapsed, his spine curved, and the last shred of his ego dissolved into the ether. He reached out. His finger hovered over the biometric scanner at the bottom of the digital contract. "I hate you," he breathed. "The feeling is entirely mutual," I replied. 10 seconds. He pressed his thumb down. The glass screen flashed green. A harsh affirmative beep cut through the air. "Biometric signature accepted. Transfer complete." Instantaneously, the room shifted. The screeching alarm cut off mid-chirp. The projector screens behind us flickered, the angry red "system failure" vanishing into static before resolving into a calm, steady blue status bar. "System restored." Administrator JTHORNE. The silence that followed was heavy, stunned, and absolute. I picked up the tablet. It felt heavier now, weighted with the ownership of a Fortune 500 entity. I looked at the screen. My name was listed at the top of the org chart. I own the buildings. I own the servers. I own the patent for the very software Marcus had used to build his reputation. And I owned him. Marcus slumped back in his chair, putting his head between his knees, gasping for air like a drowning man who had just been dragged to shore. "It's done," he wheezed. "It's back. You fixed it." "I didn't fix it," I said, standing up and smoothing the fabric of my dress. I felt tall. I felt like a titan. "I just logged in." I looked down at him one last time. He looked small. He looked like a child playing dress up in a suit that no longer fit him. The fear was fading from his eyes, replaced by a dawning, horrific realization of what he had just signed away. "You work for me now, Marcus," I said, loud enough for the board members to hear. "I expect a full audit on my desk by Monday morning. If the numbers are off by even a decimal point, I'll fire you for cause and strip your severance." I turned my back on him. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking a rhythm of victory against the polished floor. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. These people who had sneered at my off-brand shoes and my lack of a wedding ring only an hour ago now looked at me with a mixture of terror and reverence. I caught the eye of the former prom queen, the one who had laughed when Marcus poured punch on my dress senior year. She quickly looked down at her shoes. I pushed through the double doors and into the cool night air. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the massive, overwhelming rush of adrenaline. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that tasted sweeter than it ever had before. I had walked into this building a ghost. I was leaving it a queen. I'm Sutton Gallagher, 34 years old, and I just executed the most ruthless hostile takeover in Silicon Valley history while wearing a dress I bought on clearance. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel was silent, save for the frantic, wet gasps of Gavin Sterling. The man who had once glued my locker shut and called me poverty trash in front of the entire junior class was now hyperventilating into a silk napkin. Behind him, on the massive 40-foot projection screen intended for his keynote speech, a digital countdown clock was ticking away the remaining seconds of his career. 00:59. The red light from the screen washed over the room, turning the terrified faces of our former classmates into crimson ghosts. They were frozen. Their phones were bricked. The Wi-Fi was dead. The only thing functioning in this entire building was the tablet resting under my manicured fingertips. "Please," Gavin wheezed, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. "Sutton, you can't do this. The investors, the SEC, they'll kill me." "The SEC isn't the problem, Gavin," I said, my voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly reasonable. "The problem is that you built Sterling Hail Dynamics on a foundation of code you stole from my father's patent 15 years ago. You thought he was just a confused old man you could bully into a settlement. You didn't realize he had a daughter who memorized the kernel architecture before she learned to ride a bike." I tapped the screen of my tablet. The countdown skipped a beat, dropping suddenly. 00:45. "The patch," I said, sliding the digital contract toward him. "It's the only thing that stops the worm. If that clock hits 0, the encryption key deletes itself. Every server, every backup, every scrap of user data Sterling Hail possesses will be scrubbed. It will be a digital apocalypse. Your stock price won't just dip, it will cease to exist." Gavin looked at the tablet. It was a simple transfer of equity. 51%, controlling interest, total subjugation. I watched a bead of sweat roll down his temple and drip onto the contract. It was disgusting. It was perfect. "This is blackmail," hissed Jessica, his wife and the former head cheerleader who had once poured punch on my debating notes. She was clutching her useless iPhone like a talisman. "It's a market correction," I replied, not even looking at her. My eyes were locked on Gavin. "You have 30 seconds to decide if you want to be the CEO who lost everything or the minority shareholder who gets to keep his house." The room seemed to shrink. I could feel the collective heart rate of the class of 2012 spiking. They had come here to flaunt their success, to compare Audis and baby photos. Now they were witnesses to an execution. Gavin's hand shook so violently his expensive watch rattled against the table. He looked at his board members huddled in the corner. They looked back with grim resignation. They knew the math. They knew I had him checkmated 5 moves ago. 0-0-15. "Sign it, Gavin," I whispered. "Save what's left." He broke. I saw the exact moment his ego fractured under the weight of his survival instinct. He let out a sob that sounded like a wounded animal and jammed his thumb onto the biometric scanner at the bottom of the screen. The tablet pinged. A crisp, cheerful chime that cut through the tension like a razor. "Transfer complete." "Welcome, MS GALLAGHER." I didn't smile. Smiling would have been too emotional. Instead, I simply tapped the execute command on the screen. Instantly, the room shifted. The ominous red light on the projection screen blinked out, replaced by a soothing corporate blue. The terrifying countdown vanished. The critical system failure text dissolved, replaced by the Sterling Hail logo spinning lazily next to a green checkmark. Around the room, a chorus of chirps and buzzes erupted as 200 smartphones simultaneously reconnected to the network. The zero-day patch I had deployed was already scrubbing the vulnerability, securing the servers, and locking Gavin out of the admin console forever. I stood up. My legs felt like steel. I smoothed the front of my blazer, brushing away an invisible speck of dust. Gavin was slumped over the table, his head buried in his arms. He was finished. "The system is restored," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "The data is safe. The stock will open strong on Monday." Gavin looked up, his face a ruin of tears and snot. "It's over," he mumbled. "You won. Are you happy?" I picked up the tablet, my company's ledger now, and tucked it under my arm. "I'm not happy, Gavin. I'm efficient," I said cold. "And regarding Monday morning," I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. I looked him up and down, taking in the wrinkled suit and the aura of defeat. "I expect a full operational audit on my desk by 8:00 a.m., I told him. "Don't be late, and Gavin, you'll be reporting to me directly. If I see a single discrepancies in the books, I'll fire you for cause and strip your severance package before you can blink." I turned my heel. The sound of my heels on the hardwood floor was a rhythmic martial beat. Click, 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 the crowd parted. The same people who had whispered about my failure to launch, the ones who had laughed when I walked in alone, now scrambled to get out of my way. I saw fear in their eyes. I saw respect. I saw the sudden, desperate calculation of people wondering if they needed to update their resumes. I walked past Jessica. She didn't say a word. She just stared at the floor, unable to meet the gaze of the woman she should have never tried to break. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the ballroom and stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. The valet was waiting with my 10-year-old sedan. It wasn't a luxury car. It had a dent in the bumper and the brake light flickered. But as I slid into the driver's seat and tossed the tablet onto the passenger side, I gripped the steering wheel and took the deepest breath of my life. My hands were finally steady. The vibration in my chest wasn't anxiety anymore. It was power. I had walked into that reunion a ghost of the past. I was driving away the owner of the future.